this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 51 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs. The committee's meeting today to continue its study on foreign election interference. The first hour will be in public, and for the second hour we will continue in camera. Today we have with us
Security Establishment and the former chair of the Site Task Force, Lyle King, Director, Risk Mitigation Programs. From the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, we have Adam Fisher, Director General, Intelligence Assessments. We have Sherry Henderson, Assistant Director, Requirements from also the CSIS. And from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, we have Lisa Ducharme, Acting Director General. Thank you all for being here today. Before we begin, I would like to remind everyone to please address all comments through the chair. And I understand, Mr. King, you will be bringing greetings on behalf of everyone. So up to 5 minutes for you. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Hello, bonjour. Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee for the invitation to reappear on the study of foreign election interference. My name is Lyle King. I am the former chair of the Security and Intelligence Security the Security Intelligence Threats to Elections Task Force, also known as SITE. And I'm now the Director of Risk Mitigation Programs at the Communications Security Establishment. I'm very happy to be joined today by my colleagues from CSIS and RCMP, with whom we work very closely in the SITE Task Force. Since our last appearance on November 3rd, there has been a great deal of media attention on the topic of foreign interference. The SITE Task Force understands the concern shown by Canadians, and we do take them very seriously. So I would like to begin by providing some background, revisit a bit on SITE, and outlining a couple of the key trends observed on threat of foreign interference. So I hope this will help set the stage and provide some context for the discussions that we have today. As mentioned in our previous appearance, CSE had recently published the renewed National Cyber Threat Assessment, or the NCTA. And the NCTA highlights that online foreign influence activities have become a new normal, with adversaries seeking to influence elections and impact international discourse related to current events. So we assess that misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation, referred to sometimes as MDM, propagated by state-sponsored cyber threat actors does represent an ongoing and persistent threat to Canadians. I will now return briefly to an overview of the SITE Task Force and the work we do. As I discussed in my last appearance, I believe it is important to have a clear understanding of the roles and responsibilities of each of the SITE members, as well as the mandate of SITE. And the SITE is comprised of members from CSE, CSIS, RCMP, and Global Affairs Canada. So SITE's mandate, just to reiterate, is to provide a clear point of engagement within the security and intelligence community for government partners, to review and focus intelligence collection, assessment, and open source analysis related to foreign interference, to provide government partners, senior public servants, and other partners with situational awareness, and to promote the use of intelligence, assessment, and open source information analysis in the protection of electoral processes through sharing with partners or, when our mandates permit, taking action to mitigate the threat. I would like to take a moment to highlight some of the important contributions that our partners have made to the task force. And again, this is an overview and does not cover all of the roles and responsibilities of SITE members. CSIS provides threat briefings and intelligence reporting to Elections Canada and the Commissioner of Canada Elections, and provides assessments of hostile state activity methodologies and capabilities to Government of Canada decision makers. Global Affairs Canada provides research on disinformation campaigns targeting Canada by foreign actors, reports on global trends, metrics, and incidents, and coordinates attribution of incidents. The RCMP investigates any criminal activity related to interference or influence of Canada's electoral processes and works closely in partnership with intelligence, law enforcement, and regulatory agencies. CSC provides intelligence and cyber assessments on the intentions, activities, and capabilities of foreign threat actors. We protect government systems and networks related to elections through cyber defense measures and provide cybersecurity advice and guidance to political parties, provinces, and other institutions involved in democratic processes. The important work the task force conducts is also done outside of election periods as we continue to help the government assess and respond to foreign threats to Canada's electoral processes. I'll just note that since our last appearance, CSE was tasked with the production of papers order to facilitate the committee's study on foreign election interference. We do understand the importance of the work of this committee, and that's why we have produced and worked to provide documents in response to that order. We submitted 36 documents in total to ensure your committee had the necessary information needed to complete your study, while at the same time respecting the national security limitations. But in conclusion, I would just state that the Site Task Force does remain vigilant to protect Canadians and Canada's democracy from threats to foreign interference. I do hope this opportunity to reappear on the committee study helps to answer further questions you may have and better showcase the importance of SITE. Thank you for the opportunity to reappear, and we look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you so much for those opening comments. We will now begin with our 6-minute rounds, starting with Mr. Cooper, up to 6 minutes. Comments through the chair, and I would ask that no two people be speaking at the same time. Mr. Cooper.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll direct my question to Mr. King, or whichever official is in the best position to answer. What is the highest security classification level of information that will be provided to this committee during the first hour?
We'll only be able to discuss unclassified information in this setting today.
And so that would also be in the case of the second hour?
Yes, Madam Chair, apologies. We will only be able to discuss unclassified information in this particular setting today, both sessions.
So there's no material difference with respect to the security level of information that would be offered in the first hour versus the second hour?
That is correct. I can confirm that there will be no difference in the level of classification at which we will discuss from the open session to the in-camera session.
Okay. And given that there is no material difference, it seems to me that it is entirely unnecessary to go in camera, especially having regard for the advice that CSIS has provided, including laid out in a February 2021 memo to the Prime Minister, that issues of foreign interference be grounded in a policy of sunlight and transparency. And therefore, I move that the second hour remain in public.
So, Mr. Cooper, I think what's suitable for the purposes of this committee, and I will welcome comment, so we'll go through, if we're paused the clock on his time, please. I think what we can do is, I would love a signal from others as to what would be best. I think the level of conversation in an in-camera setting is different than in an in-public conversation. We have, as a committee, up until now, been able to find and chart a path forward, which I regard and respect. So I think what we should do is you should use your 6 minutes, and I will gauge the audience. Mr. Turnbull wants in, and we can then sort out what the best way to proceed is. But I think it is taken in good faith. Mr. Turnbull?
Yeah, I have no problem with what Mr. Cooper is suggesting. I would just ask that he didn't ask all the witnesses that question.
It's a task force.
So I just wonder whether there's any others that would reply differently to that question.
I understand that the appearance today by witnesses is through the site task force, and Mr. King is speaking on behalf of the task force. Therefore, the answer would remain the same. I would take a nodding of heads if it's not the case. Seems consistent. So, Mr. Cooper, why don't we proceed with your 6 minutes? I'll get a gauge of the room, and then we'll get back to this.
Well, but we have a motion on the floor. I don't think there's any objection. It appears we might reach unanimous consent on this.
J'aurais aimé réfléchir. 2 minutes, juste pour et contre.
2 minutes to have a for and against.
So I think you're right that we can get there. Is it okay that one member gets a couple minutes to reflect and we continue with your time to proceed with maximum time? I think we can definitely get to the bottom of this. So can we proceed with our questions and we'll get that sorted to you before the 6 minutes is over?
So just, I don't want to belabor this, Madam Chair, but there will be a vote on the motion upon the conclusion of my 6-minute round.
I actually think we can get consensus that we don't even need a vote, and therefore that's what I would like to proceed with.
That's fair enough.
So can I return you your 6 minutes, and I will get a good gauge, and by the end of your time, your 5 minutes, well, your 4 minutes that are now remaining, I will have you an answer. Is that suitable, Mr. Cooper?
Yeah, that's very good, Madam
I
Chair.
appreciate your collaboration here.
Okay.
Back to you, Mr. Cooper, through the chair.
Okay. Ms. Ducharme, can you confirm that there are ongoing RCMP criminal investigations respecting foreign interference arising from the 2019 and 2021 elections?
Thank you for the question. Madam Chair, I can confirm that there were no criminal investigations into the 2019 elections, as per Commissioner Lucky's letter to this committee dated 28th of November 2022. That being said, there are active investigations into foreign actor interference activities at any given time, multiple investigations. With respect to the 2021 elections, I am unable to respond whether there are active investigations into the election at this time. Thank you for your question.
So there are active criminal investigations pertaining to interference in the electoral process. Is that correct?
I am unable to respond whether there are investigations, Madam Chair, into foreign election issues, into federal election issues. I am able to confirm that there are active investigations into foreign interference activities.
Okay, thank you for that. I think probably Mr. King, given that you're the chair of, or were chair of the site task force, we know that in September 21, that the site task force was monitoring interference targeting MP Kenny Chu, which was released months later. The problem is that that information was not passed on to Kenny Chu at the time. That information, he was kept in the dark. It didn't come to light until the election was already over. And so, from the standpoint of combating foreign interference, why was MP Kenny Chu kept in the dark?
Thank you for your question. Madam Chair, I'd only say, in general, as we identify through our methods what may appear to be foreign interference, we need to go through a process of evaluation before we can take actions. What we can do, and what we did do with the information that we had available to us, was inform, as was our remit, the critical election incident protocol. And that was done through regular engagements, briefings, daily reports. So there's a distinction between observing and needing to analyze to understand.
I just want to cut you off, and I want to give you as much time as to answer the question, but you did make reference to the critical election incident public protocol, which is set out in a cabinet directive, and it provides, with respect to informing a candidate who is the target of interference, that a candidate or political party be informed. So surely that would mean informed as expeditiously as possible, wouldn't it?
Madam Chair, I would just simply restate that It's not a decision of the site task force to engage in that. That is a decision made by that critical election incident public protocol. It's in their remit to make that decision, make that call. We provide the information that we have to them so that they can make an informed decision.
Thank you. So just so everyone knows, and we're all on the same page, with a nodding of heads, I will get agreement that the 2 hours will now be in public. You see that, Mr. Cooper? Magic. I know, it's a good committee to be on, this PROC committee. Up to 6 minutes. And I'll just say to all witnesses that if at any time you want to jump into an answer, give a nod and we'll make that possible, because this information is really important and there are many people who are listening and engaging. But as long as we keep questions and comments short, we can always have time. Ms. O'Connell, up to 6 minutes for you.
Madam Chair, through you to the witnesses. Following up on Mr. Cooper's questions, that the site committee would have, because I think through, it was either your testimony previously or other testimony at this committee, that the Conservative Party, which is Mr. Chu's party, did in fact send a representative who was security cleared to have these discussions, to bring allegations of any of their candidates, or on the reverse, for you and your committee to provide information to that party member. So can you speak to the fact that seems to be this suggestion that nobody was notified, but would it not be through that party process that the Conservatives had access to, that they could have raised any questions of influence and could have had that security briefing, that classified security briefing?
Perhaps I can begin. I would open it to my colleagues at the service to interject where appropriate. Those engagements with cleared members of political parties were very much to provide context to the threat, a little bit more detail to what we say publicly, so they could understand, and to help them identify some of those issues themselves as well, and quite frankly, to enable and to open up some manner of dialogue. Again, I just would like to restate that there are multiple levels of classification as well. The members that we spoke to, I believe, were cleared up to secret. Sometimes our information is more than that. Classification levels can be an issue. And again, as I was trying to state prior, the fact that we do take time sometimes to analyze before we start to take an action. I think that's important to develop a threshold and understand what you're conveying to an individual. So I would just say that.
Sorry, just because I'm limited on time, but if others want to jump in, please do. But with that being said, previously, and the reports from the national security community have actually said that, and we've talked a lot about, there's a difference between attempts and impact. And I believe CSIS has come out and said, I think site, the protocol was not engaged. Do you still feel that the 2019 and the 2021, that although there are attempts made that everybody takes very seriously, that attempts did not equal impact in the election results?
Typically, the way site approaches this matter is not to try to get into the evaluation of impact ultimately. It's to understand what is happening in that domain and to inform and to try to take some action. We don't typically get into a deep assessment of the impact of that activity.
But CSIS has confirmed that they have stated publicly that there was not an impact in the 2019-2021 elections, despite attempts, that the protocol was not reached, the incident protocol committee was not reached to actually acknowledge anything, and that has not changed since the last time you appeared here.
Correct. To my understanding, I'm not involved in that space anymore, but yes, there's no difference in that stance from my perspective.
Thank you. So then with that being said, is it not, we heard testimony on Tuesday where our witnesses, despite the national security community not indicating any sort of decry or decree that the 2019 or 2021 elections were impacted by these attempts. But we had witnesses that said they felt that there was an impact in Mr. Chu's riding. Doesn't that somewhat undermine one of our pillars of democracy? That if we're to trust the nonpartisan security officials who live in this space, who have all of the classifications that would be needed, who see the information, that isn't this kind of doing China's bidding by suggesting our elections were in fact influenced when the national security officials who know far more than any of us in this room, who have the security classification, have come out and said no, they don't see that any of these attempts were successful? Doesn't that kind of do China's bidding in undermining the stability and security of our elections?
I think we can only be honest and open with the facts that are before us at the end of the day. Again, you are speaking to perhaps bigger issues than I feel maybe I am able to address given my position. But we do strive to be open and communicate as much as possible. And that is effectively why we have opened up those channels to speak to and share some classified information with partners. So, we will do our best to identify. We will do our best to get that information to the people that need it to make a decision and take an action. Ultimately, other people are going to take some of those decisions. It's not necessarily...
With the amount of time I have left, I think Ms. Anderson would like in.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the question. I think it's a very important point that we actually need to discuss. So when we talk about foreign interference, the service is extremely focused on any foreign interference activity against our country by numerous hostile state actors. And so what we are trying to do is build that picture and educate all Canadians, because all Canadians can partake in supporting all of us in protecting our sovereignty, which includes not only our elections, but also all of our democratic institutions. And that's why these committees are so fundamentally important as well.
Thank you.
Merci. Oui, je sais que Mr. Fisher...
Thank you. Now, I know that you'd like to add something, Mr. Fisher, perhaps next time. So if you don't speak both official languages, you can put on your headsets, and we've got 6 minutes with Madame Goudreau. Over to you. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I've just learned several elements upon which I wanted to put questions, and you will let me know if I'm going down the wrong track. You've got a protocol that, practically speaking, prevented you from disclosing specifically the information or the warning that we saw in global news in order to make the population aware of this threat. Have I correctly understood that, yes or no?
Madam Chair, I wouldn't, if I understand the question correctly, just to make sure that it's a verification whether or not the protocol prevented us from sharing information that you're saying was publicly available. Publicly available information is there for everybody. We are not just...
I'll stop you right away, because with the interpretation and the understanding of things, your role, your advisory role and your role to inform the population. We've got reports here. It's written down black and white. So over and above the protocol that perhaps, and we'll come back to that question later, perhaps prevented you from informing the population, my question is then, was it this protocol that meant that we were not informed, or was there something else? Was there a concern? And that leads me to the heart of the matter, because we had the Minister of Public Security before us, and in his speech he said about concern about stigmatizing the Chinese-Canadian community and being vigilant. So if the protocol prevents you from doing this, then what is preventing us from changing things? Otherwise, I think you need to be vigilant about the role that you have to play vis-à-vis the public, namely to provide information and advice.
Thank you for that. I think I would say, with respect to the protocol, that it's there for a very particular purpose in a defined time frame during an election period. And just to note, as my colleague from the service, Cherie, just mentioned before, outside of that, there are avenues for us to communicate the trends, the information, our understanding of that threat to the public. The service does this through outreach, issuing reports. CSC and the Cyber Center do this by sharing and issuing reports. And it is the nature of declassifying some of that information that you do lose some of the granularity of those details. But what is important is for people to understand where the issues lie. So the protocol itself is very specific to the election period and whether or not to determine to go public in the event we feel we cannot hold a free and fair election. And again, that's a decision by that panel of senior deputy ministers to make that. But we all have other avenues and do use those avenues to communicate threat information, to be able to educate and prepare people for what they need to see.
Donc, considérant que vous avez...
So given that you have certain elements, there's all these different restrictive measures, of that meant you weren't able to do that, even although global news actually informed the public about this. So was the government well informed about these results? Because if you're saying there's an investigation underway, imagine there's been some warning, some alarm bells that went off. I'm putting this question to you because people are watching us. They're concerned about what's happening. And when the minister came, she said that she was not aware of this. So perhaps there's a communication issue somewhere. What actually happened? That's what I want to hear.
I will only reiterate that, especially when you have information that's playing out in a public domain, online information, we talk about online influence, that is available for people to see, that is available for anyone to pick up and look at and interpret and share. We and CITE are also trying to understand what is in behind that. Really trying to understand what is driving that information, who is driving that information exchange. Those aren't always simple, quick, easy things to do. However, and we did this routinely throughout throughout the election period, is we did share when we had information, whether it was open source. We said, look, this is in the news. We are having a look at this, try to understand what's in behind that to alert and advise. So information was shared. It's decisions on what to do with that information. And we are in a different role, in a different realm than the media and the public. We have other considerations we have to think of when we're sharing and treating information, especially classified information.
Comme il me reste 30...
As I've just got 30 seconds, in my second round of questions, we've got an extra hour. I would like to put this question to for people who are worried and watching what's happening with the electoral process. What can we actually change is my question. We're talking about trust here. And we're also talking about citizens' participation in action. And I will be putting a question to you about this famous registry of foreign agents. I'll be coming back to all of that.
Madame Goudreau.
Thank you, Madame Goudreau. Ms. Bellini, up to 6 minutes for you.
Thank you, Chair. And of course, all my questions go through the Chair as they must. And I want to thank all of the people who are here testifying before us. You know, for me, the biggest concern I have is that Canadians have faith in our system. And that if there are problems within our system, that we fix those and we don't create sort of a bunch of fearful speculation, but a conscious effort to bring clarity and understanding. And I feel that this is an area that we all need to do a little bit better. And to be quite frank, we know that China and other foreign actors have had involvement in Canada's politics and have been going on for quite a long time trying to interfere, and that's very concerning. And we see that in the 2019 election, There were some pretty profound things that happened. We're hearing that there hasn't been an impact on our elections, but I think people's fear is growing, and that really concerns me. So when we talk about this, I guess my first question, and I'll bring it, of course, to Mr. King, and if anybody else wants to answer it, please feel free to join in. But I feel, based on the research that I have done, that Canada is far behind so many other countries. And that concerns me greatly. So I guess my first question is around the registry. What kind of discussions are happening internally? And I know you can't give us all the details, but I think Canadians want to know. There's information out there that we've heard. There isn't clarity in how that's impacted us in a way. There's not clarity, quite frankly, around what MPs and their parties can do to protect themselves. I'm concerned that there could be something happening, and I would be merrily going along my way doing my work during an election, and I have no idea. So is the registry being discussed, and what are other ways that we can look forward to elections that MPs can protect themselves from these kind of things? Are there specific questions that ourselves and our parties? Because I heard, Ms. O'Connell talking about those things and saying, well, the Conservatives, well, how would they know when to ask? So what are the things that we need to be watching for as parties, as political folks, as MPs, as people who are running to be MPs, to have a better awareness and ask the correct questions so that hopefully we can get the information we need to do the things we need to do during an election process? I know that was a lot. Good luck at it.
I will probably pass to my service colleagues maybe to talk about foreign registry or a few of those points, but just briefly, in terms of protection of MPs, and maybe I should just start by saying, there's a constant learning process here for us as well. What we did in 2019, I think, worked reasonably well, and we tried to take some lessons from that and reuse or change. So there is a need, I think, constantly to evaluate where we are. I would say, in comparing us to other nations, and specifically in the Five Eyes, we've gotten very good comments and feedback from our Five Eyes partners and the way that we operate in this domain. And you're correct, there's probably some gaps there, undoubtedly, and I think we should look to highlight and close those where we can. But in terms of protection for MPs, certainly during the election, I know the Cyber Center, which is part of CSE, had a 24/7 hotline that was available for MPs to reach out to. We provided specific guidance to MPs on how to protect themselves with respect to their personal devices, information, really from a cybersecurity perspective. And I know there was other discussions in and around security for MPs from a physical perspective through probably RCMP. These were themes that came up. And the service does reach out as well and try to engage with those communities. So I don't know if the service wants to reply on that piece and maybe the registry bit. But.
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair, through you. So maybe I'll just put those in two buckets, sort of policy and some of our briefings to folks that can be impacted by foreign influence activity. So just on the policy side, foreign registry, of course, behind the scenes, certainly the service and our partners are engaged in giving advice to government on what we see as potentially useful tools that could address foreign influence activity. Something I would emphasize is that we're up against adversaries that are very sophisticated. They're using the full state apparatus in terms of their targeting against Canada. It's not a static threat. It evolves. They watch very closely how we react and how we adapt, and they look for ways to work around that. So my point in saying that is there's no one silver bullet to deal with this. And it needs to be a continuous process, a continuous conversation and engagement to address it. In terms of sort of awareness amongst Canadians and political class as well, I mean, that is something the service, outside of the site task force, has been putting a lot of effort into in the last few years, both in general terms, so engaging with parties in a classified setting, unclassified setting with broader audiences to educate them about the threat. We have a number of unclassified publications on foreign influence activity that give you a good idea of the flags to look for in terms of foreign influence activity. But we also, I just want to say, where we can, because a lot of what we're dealing with is highly classified intelligence, where we can, we do try to engage individuals that we know are being targeted. And I say that outside of any specific case or example. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Calkins, up to 5 minutes for you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The question I have for you is, and whoever can answer this, Australia's intelligence service recently intercepted a foreign interference plot, and the situation had become so grave that the Director General of Security, Mike Burgess, confirmed espionage and foreign interference on democracy with Australia have now supplanted terrorism as a nation's principal security concern. You're probably aware of that. He also expressed that Beijing used dating apps to mine confidential information from thousands of Australians with access to classified information. That's not me. That's you. It would be the equivalent here in Canada. So in response to Australia's new laws make it a crime to engage in covert, deceptive, or threatening conduct on behalf of a foreign government and so on. And we're trying to figure out here as parliamentarians what we should be doing. But it's really difficult to figure out what we should be doing if we actually don't know what's going on. And I can look up right now, I can read Bloomberg, various very credible news articles coming out of Australia where they say that they've intercepted people who are bankrolling money. We've had the same allegations here in Canada, yet nobody will say anything. If they're willing to do it in Australia, if Beijing's willing to do it in Australia, I don't know why they wouldn't be willing to try it in Canada as well. All I hear is media reports, but I can't seem to get a single official from the Government of Canada to confirm or deny that there is actually money that's being bankrolled. So I can look at the documents that you provided. I look at the cybersecurity threats against electoral infrastructure, it's fully redacted. Cybersecurity threats against political parties and government officials, fully redacted. Foreign interference that's politically motivated, fully redacted. Overt influence, fully redacted. Overall threat assessment, fully redacted. I look at the other sides of the pages here. Foreign interference for the public, fully redacted. I don't know what to communicate with my constituents. And it's a really awkward position to be in because I don't want to impugn anybody's reputation here. And that's not what my intent is. I actually believe that our government officials are doing the best that they can. I believe you're very, very, very good at monitoring. I'm not so sure because I haven't seen any results that tell me that we're good at interdicting or stopping. I've got no media reports. I've got no information that tells me that we've actually stopped anything. But I do have a former colleague that tells me very clearly that Beijing was interfering in his election. And at last meeting, the former ambassador to China said that just a threat to one riding alone undermines the integrity of our process. And I believe the bar that the government is now saying is the overall election result has to be the bar in order for us to become public with information, not just undermining the integrity of one electoral district. So I'm just wondering if you can give me some clarification because I'm very, very frustrated right now with the lack of information, the lack of transparency, and the responsibility of trying to figure out how to solve this problem as a policymaker and as somebody who votes on legislation. So what is the bar? Should the bar be interfering in a single election, in a single riding, or should it be for the entirety of the country? Should the presence of any money being discussed by a foreign actor then warrant public information? At what point does the public, because the public has to maintain confidence in our systems, in our institutions. And right now, I got to tell you, as somebody who represents the public, there is not a lot of public confidence in some of our public institutions right now. And I don't want to go down that road. I'm not trying to foment that feeling. I'm trying to protect our institutions. And I'm just frustrated. So can you clarify for me? Because Going into an in-camera meeting doesn't seem to resolve any of the questions that I have. Are we or are we not? Has any election, has any candidate in this country been affected directly by foreign interference in the last 2 elections? For any party. We hear about 11 in Toronto, we hear about Kenny Chiu. Yes or no? Has the needle been moved in a single riding in either of the last 2 elections?
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, I'll take a stab at that. There was a lot in that question. So maybe just separating what occurs during an election and outside of an election, first of all, through the protocol and otherwise. You know, there's a policy in place and protocols in place during the election for very good reason, because we want to be careful that we're not interfering with the democratic process. So there are thresholds that need to be met there. It's not determined by the site task force, it's determined by the panel of 5 in terms of when something is publicly communicated. That's during an election period. Outside of an election period, as I've said, we are communicating more. I'll take the point, you can always do better, and I think certainly within the service, we're looking for opportunities to be communicating with Canadians and politicians in an unclassified setting. So certainly I think the effort is there. And like I said, you had a lot in your question, and I've forgotten what the rest of it was. So it
was a rant, but that's
okay. Yeah.
Excellent.
Well, and I would say as well. So we can't speak to specific riding, specific candidates. We don't look at, our measure is not whether foreign influence activity has moved the needle. When we see foreign influence activity, that's enough for us. That engages our mandate. That engages an investigation. That brings advice and assessments to government. Whether it changes the course of an election or in a riding is not something we measure, and it's probably not something we could measure even if we wanted to, making that link between the two. But certainly when we see it, we report
beep happens, I have to end it, but I do want to make sure we get the valid information. Exciting news, it is a public meeting. You can go back, watch the game tape, and send us more fruitful answers. We always welcome them. Mr. Turnbull, up to 5 minutes for you.
Thanks, Madam Chair. So, I think for me, I'm worried about the repercussions of the direction that, unfortunately, the official opposition is moving in, which I think probably has some real risks associated with it. So I'm wondering, when you treat allegations in a published article in the Sam Cooper story I'm referring to that are really uncorroborated and unvalidated as fact, what are the risks of that? Through you, Madam Chair.
So thank you for the question. I'm not going to speak to any specific cases, and I'm not going to speak to the allegations within the media article. But what I will say, and it goes back to what my colleague and what one of your colleagues recently questioned, was just in regards to this ongoing, persistent threat of foreign interference. And the fact that as a nation we need to create greater awareness of that threat. And the threat does not only happen during an election process. It is an ongoing, persistent threat that we are facing, that as Canadians we need to increase awareness. So when we talk about being able to defend ourselves against the threat, we need to be able to have open conversations and be as transparent as we possibly can. Our director has come out and said publicly that foreign interference in our processes, in our democratic institutions, is one of the most serious threats that we are facing. It's not the most serious because terrorism is still extremely serious, but it is insidious, it takes its time, and they can certainly play us against each other in trying to get their interference activities moving forward.
Without interrupting you, I just want to build on that. So, but disclosing some of the information that folks with national security clearance rightfully have access to and are looking at every day, having that exposed out there in the public, this, to me, is a very dangerous game, because isn't it doing the bidding of some of these foreign actors that, wouldn't China just love it for us to have that information out there in public?
Yeah, and I'm not going to speak to the specific allegations in the article, but what I will speak to is the fact that we need to have an ongoing greater conversation on national security within this country. And we need to take the opportunities to have that and educate all Canadians and make sure that Canadians know where they can go to get information. And I take the point that maybe we can do better, as my colleague said, but we certainly are trying to reach out and educate and bring that greater awareness so people can tell perhaps truth from fiction.
Thank you. And just building on that, we heard earlier this week from the former ambassador, Mulrooney, that there were threats credible threats of foreign election interference well before 2015. And there's been some, discussion and almost implication that somehow the current government and the security apparatus that's there hasn't done a whole lot to progress on protecting our democratic institutions, which I think is false. Could one of you on the panel speak to the many steps that have been taken to essentially prepare ourselves and improve our process since 2015?
So one of the, when the service operates, of course, we do not operate out in an overt manner. A lot of our work is done in the background to support everyone in building strength and resilience against any type of threat. So what we engage on, you will not always see, but that's why it's so important to have this ongoing national security conversation to raise awareness, because every Canadian can support defending against foreign interference.
One last question is, just because the public protocol in the last election wasn't triggered, so the public wasn't necessarily notified that there was that we couldn't, and for good reason, as I understand. That doesn't necessarily mean that security agencies weren't in the background working away to mitigate and interdict the different risks and threats that were there. Is that right? And could you speak to what was being done in a general fashion?
Yes, thank you for the question. I mean, that is correct, and I think that's in part maybe the part of the problem. By nature, we have to live and operate in the shadows to an extent, given the nature of the source material, methods of collection, et cetera, that we employ. But we worked very hard in the lead up, months and months. It wasn't just during the election period, I think, is what I would be very clear about. This is an ongoing thing. I think during the election period, you see other mechanisms come into play, like the Election Public Protocol, the CEIPP. But in fact, we do work very hard. And we have to, again, make sure that our operations, our actions are backstopped with good information. So we might find something, we can't just take an action willy-nilly, nor should we be able to. We should be under processes, procedures that are reviewable by oversight bodies, and we are. So we need to meet thresholds to take action, but that does not mean that we are not feverishly at work trying to identify and get that information to be able to take action. Thank you.
Thank you. Et maintenant, on va continuer.
And now we will continue with 2 minutes 30 for Madame Goudreau. Thank you, Madam Chair. Now, as I'm going to have more time later, I'll put a very specific question to you. I'd like to hear from all of you. Foreign interference. Here, we're not talking about that. So how come that the subject of foreign interference, in the widest sense of the term, disinformation, possibilities of this and that, but here specifically we're talking about elections. How come the UK talks about means that we can pursue, and we talk about this in the US, we talk about Russian interference specifically. So how come here in Canada we're not talking about foreign interference?
Thank you for your question. Madam Chair, I would say that we do speak about foreign interference consistently, both certainly in the lead up to, and again, I refer to some of the publications that we try to put out there, both the service and the Cyber Center, and educating the public about what foreign interference is, where it can happen, where people should be aware, to try to educate. So we do speak about it, and we speak about it when we can. The difficulty as well, I think, during election periods is that we are different than the U.S., absolutely, and we do have to observe other things like the my mind is blanking. Apologies, but there's things we can communicate and things we cannot communicate, and that's why we have that critical election incident public protocol in place to be able to try
Merci,
to manage
merci, Monsieur King.
Thank you very much, Mr. King. And before we go on to Mr. Fisher, it seems that there's two different directives during the election period compared to when we're in government. So thank you very much for that. And now I'd like to hear from Mr. Fisher. Why do we hear so little about this? Yes, we hear a little bit about it, but clearly not much in the general public via the government. We don't hear them talking about this with citizens. Why?
Thank you, Madam Chair, for the question. Maybe it's a symptom of where I work, but I do find that we are talking about it more and more. I mean, that's the honest answer from me. I think about where we were 5-10 years ago, and I couldn't think, being in front of a committee like this, speaking openly about Chinese foreign influence, Russian foreign influence, Iranian foreign influence. It just wouldn't have happened. So I think we have made progress. We can go further, but it takes time, I think, and we're on the right track. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Blaney, up to 2.5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Chair. So one of the other issues that I'm really concerned about is misinformation and how that's impacting. And I have a especially significant concern in the impacts it has for rural and remote communities, Indigenous communities, and different ethnic communities. So I just want to preface that. I did see that the report released by CSE in 2021 states clearly that Canadian voters will very likely encounter some form of foreign cyber interference in the next federal election. So my question for you is, can you explain what that foreign interference looks like online, and what policies are being implemented and what measures are being taken to educate Canadians so that they have some awareness that this might be happening to them and that they should question it, and how are we protecting Canadians?
Yes, thank you for your question. In terms of online misinformation, disinformation, malinformation, that whole ecosystem, it's unfortunate our global affairs colleagues aren't here with us today to speak about, because that is very much their domain in terms of the site sort of role. But generally speaking, I think in terms of the trends, we're concerned. And you look at what Canada is going to be susceptible to, I suppose, is the ultimate thing. What is the intent of foreign actors, and what are their, foreign policy objectives, for example, with respect to Canada? We have the fortunate, sometimes unfortunate, issue that we're very close to the U.S. and our media ecosystems are very sort of intertwined there. So that is an issue as well, right, in terms of spillover. So sometimes that disinformation isn't necessarily directed at Canada, but we're getting the blowback effects because it's part of the North American sort of ecosystem. So it is problematic. I mean, it is hard to discern sometimes the origin of the information. The methodologies employed by adversaries are pretty good, and they obfuscate and they intentionally obfuscate who they are. So it's hard for us to identify who's in behind. But we have examples clearly in the past, certainly of say, Russia sharing disinformation around COVID, et cetera, and that was aimed at a number of different audiences. So, it can take a lot of different forms and come from not exactly being directed to Canada, yet we still feel the impacts. What can we do? I would maybe just like to point out that, and I'm sure this is true of the service as well, but CSE and the Cyber Center is making more of a concerted effort to specifically engage with Indigenous communities specifically so that we understand, I think, their needs from a cybersecurity perspective, given there's different geographies and different complications there, how we can better support and understand their needs. So that is certainly on our radar and things that we're engaged in. Again, I'm sure that is the same for the service, to look at particular communities, to do outreach, to educate and understand, and let them know what the risks are.
Thank you so much. I am so impressed over the last few weeks of how long one sentence can go for. But it's really impressive to see that it's not just us elected officials that can really extend a line. So it's an impressive skill to gain over time. Monsieur Berthold, jusqu'à 5 minutes pour vous.
Up to 5 minutes for you, Mr. Berthold. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for being here to the witnesses. What I'm taking away from this first hour of testimony is that, unfortunately, you're not able to disclose much information to us. And we've seen that in these numerous documents that have been sent us. When it becomes a bit more specific and where it seems that we could get more information so that as MPs we could take action and take decisions and propose legislation or legislative changes, unfortunately we're then deprived of that more specific information, because information that you hold cannot be rendered public, and the information that you hold can only be sent to the special committees that then determine whether that information can be rendered public or not. But the problem is, during an election period, this non-interventionist approach or this decision to follow the process can directly have an impact on the election result. We saw that yesterday with the former ambassador, Mr. Burton, who told us that there was this massive disinformation campaign online against Mr. Kenny Chu, and if that hadn't taken place, he believes he would still be an MP today. So if we follow this process and go through this step by step, it means, unfortunately, this then has an impact on the election results. So I understand your malaise and your unease and the difficulties of your work, but the only source of information comes from Sam Cooper. So I'd like to look at certain allegations and see exactly what you can say on that. First of all, he talks about documented evidence from the Chinese Communist regime to infiltrate all levels of government. I'll cite him in English.
Of evidence that China's officials are actually pursuing a strategy of engagement to influence Canadian officials in ways that can compromise the security of Canada and the security of Canadian institutions. Est-ce que c'est vrai?
Is that true?
Une réponse courte.
Brief answer, please. Yes or no? Thank you very much for that question.
Respond in English, just for clarity. So one of the things that we're very concerned about, actually, is that every Canadian in all levels of government
Madame la Présidente, avec tout le
Madam Chair, with all due respect, I'm just asking whether that affirmation is true or not.
On va poser le temps.
Well, we'll pause the timer. Sometimes when we put a lengthy question, the question has to be couched with some information. I think we're all respectful, so we'll give Ms. Henderson a few moments to answer also.
All levels of government are susceptible and targeted by foreign interference actors. I'm not going to specifically name a state, but I would say that all levels of government are. That's provincial, federal, municipal. All electoral candidates are.
Pourquoi vous ne pouvez pas nommer un pays?
So why can you not name a country?
Country.
I think we can easily say we know that China is very engaged in focusing, but there are other nations as well out there, and I would always be very concerned to focus on one nation and then lose the focus of what else could be happening from other hostile activities of states.
Une autre affirmation.
Another affirmation.
Beijing community groups as intermediary to engage Canadian politicians they identified as strategically valuable. True or not? Est-ce que c'est vrai ou faux?
Is it true or not?
I mean, yes, it's true. Yeah, we see China using, in particular China, non-traditional methods of foreign influence activity. So they're not relying necessarily on trained agents. They use cutouts, they use proxies, they use community groups, they use diaspora organizations and community leaders. So yes.
Merci.
Thank you. Chinese foreign interference against public officials and elected officials and public servants in Canada is very well documented by the different agencies. True or false?
Yes, true.
See.
Thank you. Global News' source. You've information about China's efforts to have an influence on Canadian politicians.
So again, I'm not going to speak specifically to one state, but every Canadian politician is potentially susceptible to foreign interference activities, and every Canadian politician needs to be aware of that and then learn how to defend themselves. And the best way to defend themselves is through awareness and discussion.
Est-ce que c'est bien documenté?
Is it well documented? Do you actually have specific cases that you don't need to name here, but do you have specific cases of Chinese influence on Canadian politicians?
I have seen specific cases of hostile activities of states against politicians, and in those specific cases, we definitely brief our government on the challenges that are being faced.
Thank you. Mrs. Sahota, up to 5 minutes for you.
Madam Chair, this has been an interesting conversation. Of course, unfortunately, it's not overwhelmingly enlightening. I feel like we're going a little bit in circles from where we started. I was talking to the analysts even earlier. You know, the job of this committee is to gather all of this information from all the wonderful witnesses we have had, but due to us not having certain security clearances, not being able to get the information that's needed, you know, Mr. Calkins was even referring to that, it's hard to make proper recommendations that will improve the oversight that we have in Canada in order to get the best results and the most protection of our democracy for Canadians. So a lot of what we've heard from even previous witnesses, or at least the witnesses that we had on Tuesday, was that perhaps the threshold is too low. Maybe we should be having a higher threshold to sound the alarms. Your job is to gather information, not necessarily to analyze that information. But would you be able to leave this committee with some type of recommendation as to, you know, what more we can do as a government, as a committee, to recommend something to government so that Canadians have confidence in our systems? It's not about, you know, the one riding, you know, or political gain from one party to another. And to some degree, it's disappointing that that is the conversation we've ended up having throughout this study. It's about our democratic system. It is about that larger picture that, Mr. King, you were talking about, that you said you may not be able to answer to. But I am sure, being on this task force, you probably do think about those larger issues, because I think about them at night. It keeps me up wondering, you know, where we're headed as with our institutions and our democratic systems. So I'd really like any of you to be able to provide us with some insight as to what our recommendations should be.
Okay. I can start. So thank you very much for the question. One of the things I think we need to do is make sure that our security agencies actually have the tools that we need in order to do our job. The CSIS Act was created back in 1984. A lot of the challenges we're dealing with today on the technology side, the CSIS Act, the creators of the CSIS Act did not foresee those kind of challenges. The other thing within the CSIS Act is we cannot share information, classified information, with federal provincial or municipal partners. We need to be able to do that, but Section 19 of our Act specifically prohibits it. So just to be able to have the tools that we need as an agency in order to be able to properly investigate and advise the government on threats would be extremely valuable.
If I can just add a few comments, Madam Chair, as well. I think I think we'll be very honest, and my colleague Adam has stated this. This is a learning process for all of us. Adam, you mentioned that 10 years ago you wouldn't imagine sitting here before. I wouldn't have imagined sitting here before committee 2 years ago, I can tell you. But we're making a concerted effort, I think, to be more transparent and putting our information and declassifying information more and more. And I'll give the example of the Russian invasion of the Ukraine, where we have CSE has declassified information to put out and literally put out in Twitter feeds that we've observed activities and instances of Russia sending misinformation about, say, Canadian forces operating in Ukraine. So those things can change, and and I think that we are on a path of being more and more open, and I think that we will continue down that trend. So I think that's one thing, and it's as much a culture, I would suggest, as well within our organizations to wrap our heads around that. It doesn't happen overnight, but instances like war will trigger, I think, drastic response. So I think that's a thing, and that is not unique to Canada. I've heard that reflected from my Five Eyes colleagues also. Sorry, Lisa, you look like you want to speak, please.
I just wanted to make sure we didn't run out of time. So from the RCMP perspective, the RCMP does face challenges with transitioning security and intelligence information into investigations, criminal investigations. So I know that there's been lots of discussion with this with our elected officials and our senior policymakers, but that is one area that the RCMP is continuing to closely collaborate on this issue. But if you're looking for recommendations, that's another area from the RCMP perspective that continuously challenges us in this foreign actor interference space. Thank you.
Excellent timing. Wow, on the dot. We're going to now restart the way rounds would work. So we'll go with a 6-minute round for all, and then use our time accordingly. And we'll be starting again with Mr. Cooper, up to 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll direct my question to whichever official is in the best position to respond. Is it true that Beijing security agencies might try to compromise Canadian officials who travel to China, yes or no?
Yes.
Okay. Is it true that Beijing's consulate in Toronto uses an extensive network of community groups to conceal the flow of funds between Beijing officials and network members, yes or no?
So I'm not going to speak specifically to that question, just due to the requirement to maintain operational secrecy. But what I will say, and we have said, is that hostile states will use whatever avenues they can to engage in foreign interference activities.
And that would include using embassies, consulates to direct money to proxies.
So I wouldn't speak again specifically in regards to money, but what I would say is they will use whatever avenues that they can in order to achieve their objectives.
So yes. And is it true that staff of politicians that are targeted provide information, relay information to foreign state bad actors such as the PRC?
So again, I'm not going to comment on any specific operational questions, but what I would say, and as I had noted earlier, that any Canadian citizen, any electoral official is susceptible or can be approached from a foreign hostile actor in order to engage in foreign interference activities.
Do you have evidence that is happening?
I'm not going to speak to any specific investigations, but as I noted, that we need to build our defenses against any foreign interference activity and make people aware that they are being targeted or could potentially be targeted.
Is it true that a Greater Toronto-based network involving candidates, aides, a provincial MPP, unelected public officials, does that exist? Yes or no? Did that exist at the time of the 2019 election, or at all?
So I'm not going to speak to, again, any specific operational questions, but what I will again reiterate is that we need to maintain strong defenses against foreign interference and make sure that we educate all Canadians, including MPs, in regards to the potential threat that they face from foreign interference actors.
Okay. Ms. Henderson, you said, again, and you said it before, that the best way for politicians to protect themselves is general awareness. That's fine and well, but that's insufficient. You further said that, in answer to an earlier question, that politicians are being targeted, and that when politicians are targeted, that information is conveyed to the government. But what you didn't say is that the information is passed on to the politician who is targeted. Why not?
What we will do as an organization, if we determine that individuals are under potential threat from foreign interference activities, is have discussions with individuals. We will also go out and approach everybody. I don't have any figures at this moment, and I'm not going to speak to operational specifics. But I will say,
but where's the transparency? Where is the sunlight?
Part of the sunlight is being able to have this ongoing conversation in regards to foreign interference. Canadians, I think, feel very comfortable, and the more we have this discussion and make awareness.
It's a conversation.
Hey. So now we have a point of order. Like, we all just eat into all of our own time by just, and I asked really kindly, and I think I've demonstrated my intentions here. I've tried to be really good for the sake of all of us. Letting one person speak and one person answer, it's important because this is a study that we all agree is important. So we might not like the questions, we might not like the answers, but it's important that we hear the questions and we hear the answers. Mr. Turnbull, does that echo your point of order?
You read my mind, Madam Chair.
Excellent. I'm hoping for a career after politics. That might be just that. So I'm actually going to ask Ms. Henderson to be able to respond, and we're going to have a really tough conversation and an important one. Ms. Henderson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, it goes back to the importance of having the conversation and the importance of raising awareness. There are many Canadians who I would call unwitting. They wouldn't even know that they were being approached, and that's why these conversations are fundamentally important.
If you're an unwitting target, wouldn't it be all the more important to be informed?
But if they're unwitting, it may not have raised to that point that anybody is aware. And so the more we can have those conversations and the type of things individuals can look for, then they can say, I think there's something happening, I need to talk to somebody. And then we can have even that greater conversation. It doesn't just come from us, it comes from all Canadians creating that greater awareness to make us much more resilient as a country. Well,
I would just say that I just don't see any evidence that that is happening. The suggestion is made that it is, but no examples can be cited. We know that there's no evidence that concrete action has been taken. It's well established that interference has been ongoing, but no one has been charged, let alone convicted. So in the face of that, having these general conversations about foreign interference really doesn't seem to address the fundamental issue at hand.
Thank you so much. A lot has changed. It's interesting because sometimes I get a text message, and I've got Ryan here from my team, and I always take a screenshot of it and be like, is this spam or is this real? And so oftentimes he'll be like, don't answer it or do answer it. So it's interesting how much the world is changing, and I like to believe that I'm hip and cool. Turns out not the case. Mrs. Romanado, up to 6 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to put a question to Ms. Henderson. You have mentioned that all levels of government are targeted. And according to Section 19, you're not able to share information with the provinces and territories and municipalities. So currently, is there a way for the federal agencies to collaborate with provinces and territories and municipalities for their elections?
Yes, thank you very much for the question. There are several ways that we are working hard to get the message out. We do provide many unclassified briefings, and in some cases, individuals within those other provinces or municipalities, or even in some cases, industry, can get a clearance sponsored by the Canadian government, and that will allow us to have greater conversations. The other thing I can say that the service does a bit more in the background is we will engage our threat reduction mandate in order to mitigate any threats, and sometimes that will enable us to engage those partners as well.
Mr. King?
Mr. King? Thank you for that question.
As well, that the Cyber Centre does engage regularly with provincial and territorial and some municipal bodies. In fact, we do things like regular threat briefings, which really describe, to be quite fair, it's around cyber threats and information we can share. So it would be in an unclassified manner, but it's an ongoing thing. It's not just during election, but it's to better enable them to understand the threat and build up their own defenses so that we're providing with what we're seeing in terms of trends. So that's an active thing, and that goes for some of the provincial electoral bodies as well. There's engagement there on a persistent basis. I would have to clarify about the classification of those discussions, but they are ongoing and persistent. Perhaps Lisa.
Sure. Madam Chair, just to let you know, a number of provinces have their own legislation regarding threats to election at that level, but the RCMP is uniquely placed to work with those police of jurisdiction on both a proactive and reactive basis to educate them on indicators of foreign actor interference, to provide them support. So we are connected with our police of jurisdiction partners at the provincial and municipal levels, exchanging information on such issues. Thank you.
And so I just want to focus a little bit on conversations that we've been hearing about the fact that members of Parliament of this committee do not have the same clearance, security clearance, that would allow you to share some of the information that has been requested. And I understand that the 2019 election report has been sent to NCCOP, and that was studied at the time by the members. And I understand, I think at the time, the Conservatives, I'm not sure if they were on that committee at that time or not, and that the 2021 election report will be tabled with NCCOP that has the necessary clearance to dig a little bit further and ask those questions. Is that accurate?
I would have to verify. I imagine it will happen. We welcome, honestly, review by oversight bodies to have a look at what we're doing. And absolutely, we've had conversations with NSICOP on previous activities, so I imagine that would be forthcoming. I could not verify with you today whether they've received the 2021 report and are looking at that actively, but they do have the clearances. We do disclose the information to them unredacted. We are at their will to answer questions.
Perfect. And further to that, you were talking a little bit about, reviews. And Ms. Henderson, you mentioned that I think it was the CSIS Act was created in 1984. I was 10. So looking at the color of my hair, we can imagine some people weren't probably born here. Talking about cybersecurity, Canada is working to increase our capacity and our capability in cyber. I used to sit on the Defense Committee and was Parliamentary Secretary in a previous government, so I'm fully aware of cyber capabilities and our strive to increase that. Given the fact that the CSIS Act was created in 1984 and these new technologies that we're hearing about, further to my colleague's question earlier, what would be the proper mechanism to make sure that we update that Act so that it captures what you need to do, what our agencies need, to be able to do the work that they need to do?
You'll all be aware, of course, a couple of years ago, we did, 4 years ago, 5 years ago now, we did do C-59, which had some very important additions to our act. But as I said, it's very old. Some nations do a regular review just to make sure it's all up to standard and can allow the agencies to engage and do what they need to do into the future as well. So the CSIS Act has withstood the time, but it is time for a review and to have a good close look at it.
Is there anything further before I think I have like 30 seconds left. If not, I'll cede my time to the next. Thank you.
I will only say one thing, if I may. Sorry. Another thing we do need to look at within the Act is our ability to use big data and crunch big data. We don't have that ability at this point. Sorry.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Madame Goudreau, jusqu'à...
Madame Gadreau, up to 6 minutes. Thank you. I've got a quick question. I hope a quick answer. I believe, Madam Chair, that it's Ms. Henderson who said the following. We have informed the government of foreign interference activities. I'd like to know more. What was it and when?
So, merci beaucoup pour la question.
Thank you very much for that question.
This regularly provides intelligence assessments and intelligence reporting to the government to advise them of threats to national security under our Act.
Mais ma réponse, c'est...
But the what? Perhaps we're not able to know about that, but when? Was it in 2019, 2020, 2021? Do you have a month or a specific date?
Merci pour la question.
Thank you for that question. The only reason why I'm taking a bit of time is because regularly we respond and give that type of information.
Reports on an ongoing basis, looking at the situation that we're dealing with. So I would never say it was just a certain month or even a certain quarter, but regularly.
Donc, ce que ça veut dire que...
So that means that the information must have circulated about possible alerts, which then led Global News to come out with its article. And as I said at the outset, I would like to talk about the registry, the Foreign Agents Registry, in fact, because Mr. Mulroney and Mr. Burton are two witnesses the other day, I imagine. You know that they're both Sino specialists, and they talked about the Five Eyes, and particularly what's been happening in Australia and how they've reacted and equipped themselves. And they mentioned that having a foreign agents registry would be necessary in order to intervene with greater vigilance and also to be able to take action. So I'd like to ask you whether a registry that could be set up quickly could contribute to countering Chinese foreign interference. Perhaps Ms. Ducharme, I'd like to hear from you on that.
Question, Madam.
Thank you for that question. I'll answer in English so that I'm more specific.
Perspective, if I am understanding the question correctly about a foreign agent registry, the RCMP would find that valuable for Canadians as it would identify foreign actors undertaking certain activities that are operating in the interest or not within the for the Canadian public. Obviously, this is a topic of much interest right now, and we are supporting our elected officials in those discussions in close collaboration with our security and intelligence partners and public safety.
Alors, Madame la Présidente.
So, Madam Chair, through you, how urgent do you believe it is to actually set up this registry and get it going?
Merci pour la question.
Thank you for that question. Well, if I've understood, how urgent?
Any tool that supports the RCMP and their activities is a good progress in the right direction, but we do want to get this right in close consultation with Canadians, respecting Privacy Act issues, respecting all of the legislation that exists that complements and is related to this particular endeavor. And again, in close consultation with our elected officials and our partners on the way ahead.
Madame la Présidente,
Madam Chair, I'd also like to hear from Ms. Henderson on this. Do you think a registry is urgent and necessary to help you to do your work well? Thank you very much for that question.
Agreement with what my colleague, Ms. Ducharme, has said, because we certainly see the benefit of this. We have provided our advice to government and the policymakers, and we do need to get it right when we do it. So, as Adam noted earlier, the conversation is ongoing, and we are providing advice and engaging with our partners to help track the best way forward.
donc, Madame la Présidente,
So, Madam Chair, what I can see is that there's restrictive issues in terms of the protocol, and there's other issues when it comes to the Act, the CSIS Act, which also puts brakes on moving ahead. And I understand also that there's certain tools that need to be developed urgently. So I would like to give you this last remaining minute to say out loud to what extent it's important to act now. Perhaps Mr. King, through you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, I support my colleagues in their view when it comes to foreign registry. It's not a domain that I would play in, as we are CSE is a foreign intelligence agency. These are more domestic related pieces. But yeah, I think the items you've noted are fair to note. With respect to, I would go back to the protocol and the notion that maybe it is restrictive. I think it's always good to review. Put it that way, it's always good to review to see whether or not we have it right. I'm not going to say we have it right or we have it wrong. I think the mechanisms in behind that support it are good and sound, have been proven so over a couple of elections. And I think we found that is good. It's a difficult other question when you put information out publicly, but I think we should always have the conversation to evaluate whether or not we've done the right thing or not. So,
désolé pour Monsieur Fisher.
Sorry, Mr. Fisher.
Madame Blaney, Eustace.
Madam Blaney, you have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and through you as always. I guess my first question is simply this. How does an MP become aware if they are targeted? Is the MP notified? Is the party? Is both? You talked about the government being notified, so is the government the only one, or I'm just trying to get that clear. And the other part of that question is, what is the protocol during an election compared to pre-election time?
So thank you very much for the question. And I would again go back to some of the comments I have made earlier just in regards to we need to educate our MPs so they could potentially recognize if they were being approached. And so the service has certain documents we've produced. One is actually called FI and U, I believe is the name of it. It's an unclassified document, but it sets a base level so individuals can look at that and say, okay, yes, this has happened to me, and then reach out for a conversation. The service has, on some occasions, as I noted, if we have determined that someone is being approached and there is a real threat there, we will go and have a conversation with that individual. But I will, let's be honest, we can't see and do everything. So we really require Canadians to recognize when they may be approached and recognize the fact that they are a very valuable asset and that they have a voice and that people could be trying to use that voice. And so they really need to be aware of that threat to their own security.
Okay, thank you. The next question I have is actually for the RCMP. I'm just curious. I've heard stories from folks who feel like they've been exposed to foreign interference, people from vulnerable communities that want to come forward to talk about things that may be happening within their ethnic community. And when they go to the RCMP, depending on the community, sometimes there's not an awareness, and so they sort of get passed around without a resolution to the problem. So I'm just wondering what tools and resources are available to everyday Canadians to report information related to foreign foreign interference? And is there a need for RCMP to have a little more training to address those issues in a more meaningful way?
Thank you for the question. Madam Chair, the RCMP takes all threats of intimidation and state-backed harassment and foreign interference very seriously. It has a national security information network that has been set up to receive complaints either via telephone, a 1-800 number, or via email. But most often, the individuals, when they may feel targeted, the first place that they will go to is their local police of jurisdiction. Or if they feel there's an imminent or a pending threat, they should be advised to contact 911 immediately. So the RCMP works with the police of jurisdiction in proactive and reactive information sharing to increase awareness of indicators of foreign actor interference and whatnot. But as mentioned, there is the National Security Information Network. It's an RCMP system that is managed 24/7, 365 days a year by trained RCMP telecommunications operators, and we work closely. The CSIS also has a reporting system for that, so together, when we receive tips that are credible, we collaborate on that. So there's multiple ways and means for individuals to report, but as mentioned, it's usually 911 if they feel immediate threats, or their first place is the police of jurisdiction. And I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. Somewhat, I appreciate that. So I did appreciate one of the recommendations, I think it was you, Ms. Henderson, that talked about opening the CSIS Act for sharing information with different levels of government. Right now it's sort of pinioned in just the federal level, but not the other levels, which I can imagine for provinces, territories, and municipalities, it would be very useful to know that information. So knowing that the reality of our world is that how foreign interference intersects in our communities is an ever-changing, growing, and developing reality, I'm just wondering, is there any other changes to the Act or to any other legislation that would be helpful to allow the work to be done in a more meaningful way?
Thank you for the question. As I had noted earlier, another very beneficial tool would be the ability to use big data and crunch data, of course respecting the privacy of Canadians, but we still need to be able to use the data to determine trends. It helps us get leads. It helps us set ourselves up in order to follow the investigative route. And I don't think we can underestimate the value of being able to use data. Will help us in our investigations.
And my last question is just around going back to that idea of misinformation, especially in different types of social media and other media outlets. I'm just wondering, should the Canadian government have a clearer process to publicly identify foreign-based sources of disinformation? So like a public naming or revealing to let people know that these are sources that might not be safe for us to gather information from.
I think that's a tricky one. If you're saying we want to have a list of don't go here, or you could be at risk here, because it shifts over time. And the problem is platforms can be used by anybody. So, to single out one, because there may be presence of some nefarious activity there, could be detrimental to others that use the same platform when it's, in fact, not used solely for that. There are encrypted messaging apps that exist that we use to communicate with one another because we trust them more, to be quite frank, sometimes, and that the public use and that bad people use. So it's kind of a difficult thing to draw a line and say this bad, this good. And as well, this sort of issue does shift over time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Culkin, it's up to 5 minutes for you.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, my question to Mr. Fisher. Can you just confirm to me, I think you've said several times at this committee so far in your answers that you don't measure votes or voter intention as part of your assessment for interference. Did I get that right?
Madam Chair, what I was trying to communicate is that when we're investigating foreign influence activity during an election or outside of it, we're not necessarily, and we're not focusing on impact. We're focusing on the activity of the adversary. So if they're acting in a way that is deceitful, and against the interests of Canada. That's what we focus on. Whether they're successful or not is secondary to our purposes.
It just seems odd to me because the purpose of an election is for the political actors who are operating lawfully in the country to move votes back and forth. How would you know if somebody is actually interfering in an election if they weren't actually able to adjust any election results?
Well, again, we'd be looking at the activity. So if it's an agent of a foreign state who is, for example, looking to get the vote out for a certain candidate and is messaging in that regard, that's what would concern us. Whether the agent had success or not would be secondary. But any attempt of foreign influence activity would be something that we would take seriously and look into. I hope that answers the question.
Sort of. We've heard from other witnesses this week that our intelligence services do not have a functional working knowledge of what's being said or reported in Chinese language media, not only here but everywhere. So that would be Mandarin and Cantonese, I would presume. It's also been reported that only 18% of senior Global Affairs Canada officials have met language requirements for their positions, and so I'm wondering, do we actually have the assets to actually fully understand what's being communicated in this country in languages that would not be our official languages? 18%'s a
maybe I can. I'm not going to speak to. I'm not going to speak to government officials and their language requirements specifically, but we always look to increase our capability when it comes to foreign languages. So, you know, it's the same with any skill set. These can be rare, hard to come by, depending on what our focus is with respect to the intelligence requirements and the questions we need to answer. And it's not always easy to find or to get people moved through security processes and clearances either. So there are a number of things that we have to contend with that maybe others do not. In terms of building capability. So would I say we need more? I would always say that we need more. And that stands for cyber skills as well. People with science, tech, engineering, and math backgrounds. It's difficult, but we do our best, and we do have some capability. But I think we would always say we would like to have more skill sets and languages also.
Testimony that we've heard earlier to this meeting, it was alluded or alleged that the Chinese communist regime in Beijing has a disproportionate number of employees here in their various consular activities. They gave us numbers for what other consulates from Japan and, say, other countries might have, and the numbers that they gave us were staggering. Would your assessment of the operatives or agents or consular officials here from China be disproportionate? Do you think that they have too many people here?
Well, my light has come on, so I'll try to answer that. So I'm not a diplomat. I don't know what is normal or abnormal in terms of consular representation, and I wouldn't speak to that specific assertion. I mean, what I would do is echo what my colleagues have said, which is foreign hostile states will use any platform in order to further foreign influence activity, and that can include consular representation.
You've talked a little bit about your ability to collect, mine, and get data, crunch numbers, and so on. I've suggested that I think, my sense is that the government has a good job of gathering the information. I'm not confident, based on the fact that other countries are very public about the fact that they've hauled people to the mat for foreign interference, and we haven't got any examples here in this country. I don't know why operatives in other countries would be any different than they are here. Well, I'm running out of time, but I'm just wondering, are you missing some tools to actually haul people to the mat who are actually interfering in our democracy? Is that the problem?
So I'll just really quickly echo what my colleague from the RCMP said, which is the requirement to address intelligence to evidence. So that is an obstacle for us, and it can our inability to translate intelligence that's collected in a very covert way into an evidentiary arena that can assist law enforcement is a challenge for us.
Thank you so much. And just for the record, when the beep beep happens, that means you've run out of time. It's the end of time. Ms. O'Connell, up to 5 minutes for you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and again through you to our witnesses. I'm going to make a couple comments first and then get to my question. One of the frustrating pieces to this study, and I was a member of NSICOP, so I had that security clearance, so I do understand the nature of how difficult it is to receive that clearance. I understand the quality of that information. I understand the sensitivity of that and all of the protections that go along with it. And I highly recommend, if other members have the opportunity from their party to be part of NSICOP, you should absolutely do it. But because you learn a lot, but it's done in a way that is sensitive and secure and in a way that protects our national interests. And there's always this debate around what should be shared publicly so Canadians can know, can prepare themselves, but then also the risks of sharing that information, because then our adversaries also get that information. And sometimes it's not the specific details, but it's operational information. And it's frustrating because I'm sure you'd love to be able to answer these questions, give all these details, but in doing so, to providing that to Canadians, you're also providing that to China or Russia or those other foreign state actors. So I even sit here frustrated sometimes. And what's also a little frustrating is the nature of these conversations, because they are so sensitive, it becomes such a political opportunity for some to hold up documents that are redacted and like how salacious. What a public, prop that can be. Or to call in witnesses and say, tell me what you heard in that meeting, knowing that it was a classified meeting and those details can't be shared. Like how salacious, how political, looking for this smoking gun instead of actually talking about, and I give credit to all my colleagues across the floor too for actually trying to hone in on some recommendations to how to improve the system in Canada. I don't think anybody has said that everything here is perfect and there's no improvements to be made. Of course not. It's going to be evergreen, just the nature of the threats are constantly changing. But I also wanted to point out some of the areas that we're criticizing, like, how well does SITE work? How well does the critical election incident public protocol work? Is NSICOP the right place to look at this stuff? I remind this committee, none of those things existed prior to 2015. None of them. So if national, security threats, political foreign influence didn't just begin in 2015, but there have actually been things put in place to make it better, to give parliamentarians more opportunities to access this information, to allow Canadians to see more. I credit CSIS has done in seeing the CSIS director's public comments. CSIS has come a long way if you actually follow any of these things, and I did for a long time, reading those speeches. They have come a long way in sharing information. Can they go further? Yes, I think so. But how do we have that conversation? So I just want to ask, because I know I've used a lot of my time. I want to ask about the details of that balance of sharing that information versus the very real risks. And that can include things like how we collect information. What we don't know could be useful to adversaries. So could maybe Ms. Henderson, because I called out CSIS for clearly making a distinction, your thought process in that balance of risk versus communicating with Canadians?
So thank you very much for that question, Madam Chair. It's actually a very important one because I can honestly say that it's a very difficult balance to strike, and it's one that whenever we are doing assessments, sharing information, we are trying to look at what can we actually say that will still enable us to get the messaging across, but protect our sources, our techniques, our tactics, so that we aren't giving too much to an adversary, so that we are still able to inform Canadians to the best that we possibly can without actually harming them through making weaknesses in our national security structures. So it's a balance that we try to strike, and we're constantly learning and evolving as we go. And I appreciate your comments that we have come a long way.
Thank you so much. Madame Goudreau, 2 minutes et demie.
Madame Goudreau, 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to say that I'm sorry, through you, Chair, to put the witnesses down this slippery slope, because we have facts. We see things are not going well. We see that in the government. So I want to put questions to you because I'm thinking about my citizens, and I'm not seeking power. I'm sincere when I'm putting these questions. We talk about the level of the infiltration of the United Front and the Security Ministry of the Chinese state vis-a-vis political parties. Do you think that it would be necessary through the registry to look at volunteers, for example, employees working in ridings? In fact, to look at all of these individuals and platforms who gravitate around the political candidates. Can I hear from you, Ms. Ducharme, first?
Madam.
Thank you for that question. And Madam Chair, if I've understood, you're looking at the scale of the foreign registry. Where do we stop and start?
This is a discussion that is underway right now with our senior policymakers and in consultation with our experts at applicable security and intelligence agencies. And we'll provide input into that, but ultimately that'll be the discussion at that level of what's the appropriate scope, what's the appropriate breadth and width of where the registry will start and stop.
Madame la Présidente.
Madam Chair, considering that we've just had one testimony here, would it be possible to ask our witnesses to give us some extra elements on these proposals to amend the CSIS Act, and what can we do to amend the protocol, and how urgent is it to develop a registry? We can draw inspiration. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. I think we can fast-track this. I think we've just got 30 seconds, so I'd like to hear from Mr. Fisher now. Does he agree with his colleagues about the need for a registry?
Yes, I agree with what's been said by my colleagues with regards to a registry. I mean, I think it would be a useful tool that would bring some baseline transparency. And as has been mentioned, it's something that we're discussing with the policy departments that lead the development of tools in response to the threat.
Thank you so much. Mrs. Blaney.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. And, this has been a very interesting conversation, and it is frustrating. I think we're just trying to get clarity. And I reflect on the fact that if this was easy and simple and not complex, wouldn't that make life a lot easier for the process? And I really appreciate the comments made during testimony about the fact that this is evolving, and adapting to that evolution is a key part of this process. So one of the questions I have is just around, it's like I'm hearing a lot about what's happening in terms of monitoring the foreign interference. I'm curious about the other side, which is what's happening around deterring that. And is there any place that actions are happening, but there's no laws that technically means nothing is happening that is inappropriate, but there's a concerning trend, and how are we going to address that? And are there gaps in legislation that could help address those things? Like I guess what I'm really trying to wrap my head around is, where is the slippery slope, and are we do we have the appropriate rules in Canada to deal with that slippery slope so that we don't get to the part where we're over the edge? And in terms of that, is it a question of creating more transparency like other countries have done with tools like the Foreign Agent Registry? So I hope that makes sense. I'm just trying to figure out where is the gap, how can we start to fill that, and how do we use those processes to inform Canadians in a more fulsome way, not necessarily of the details, but of the processes in place to protect politicians, people who are running to be politicians, and the country at large for addressing foreign interference.
So thank you very much for the question. And there are no simple questions in this. I appreciate that. I would say that one thing we haven't spoken about too much, I think I mentioned it earlier, is that the service does engage its threat reduction mandate. And you will not be aware of that. It is behind the scenes. But it is one way that we are able to engage and mitigate the threat in some areas. So we do that. But of course, that's legal. We do everything legally and respecting the rights of Canadians and people within Canada. So I think we're out of time. I'm sorry. I apologize.
We
I heard the
are
buzzer, yeah.
sorry too. Thank you. Thank you so much. We would go to Mr. Cooper.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I will be moving a motion at this time. And so I will first read the motion into the record. That given the global news report published by Sam Cooper on February 8, 2023, revealing that national security officials drafted a warning for the Prime Minister in June 2017, alleging that Beijing agents were assisting Canadian candidates running for political offices, and included well-documented evidence of Beijing's efforts to infiltrate all levels of government, that the committee, A, add additional meetings as required to its study on foreign election interference, B, invite the following witnesses to testify in public on the contents of the report: Katie Telford, Chief of Staff to the Prime Minister; Michael Wernick, former Clerk of the Privy Council; and Daniel Jean, former National Security and Intelligence Advisor to the Prime Minister; and C, order the production of all memoranda, briefing notes, emails, records of conversations, and any other relevant documents, including any drafts which are in the possession of the government with respect to the matters referred to in the Global News report, provided that the documents which may be redacted to protect the identities of employees or sources of Canadian or allied intelligence agencies shall be deposited with the clerk of the committee in both official languages within 2 weeks of the adoption of this motion.
Discussion. Mr. Turnbull?
Madam Chair, I didn't have an opportunity to speak to my motion. I've moved a motion.
You moved it, so.
So now I'd like to speak to it.
Point of order.
That is the normal process.
That's the normal process.
Can we, the normal process is also to share motions in both official languages, and I would like to request that from Mr. Cooper because we'd like to actually read the motion. I need to see it in writing. And I would also ask, Madam Chair, if possible, if we could have a little bit of time just to discuss the motion as a team, just have a very short recess to take a look at it.
Let's just get this motion circulated first. I'm not sure who all has it, so it's in both official languages?
Yep.
We'll just get that circulated. MP Suds, it's coming electronically to all colleagues, so please stay tuned. Miriam, Can you please pass it in both official languages to everyone? Thank you. Ms. MP Suds, I understand that it's been electronically sent. Have you received it? Thank you for the confirmation. Mr. Cooper.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a relatively straightforward motion. It arises from yesterday's Global News article that reveals that there was a memo that had been requested by Katie Telford, the Chief of Staff, that was then prepared by Daniel Jean, the former National Security and Intelligence Advisor to the Prime Minister, that in turn was passed on to Michael Wernick, the then clerk of the Privy Council, and that the contents of that memo note that there is well-documented evidence of an active campaign of interference by the Beijing regime that threatens the national security of Canada, that involves the corrupting of politicians, including assisting Canadian candidates running for political offices. In light of these, in light of this report, given the scope of the study, I think it's appropriate that we hear from the three individuals named in the report.
Thank you, Mr. Cooper. And just to confirm, there is no relation between yourself and Mr. Sam Cooper?
There is no relation.
I would just not want you to have any unintended consequences just looking out. Mr. Turnbull, the floor to you.
Just ask for a short recess to have a team huddle and talk about this. We haven't had a chance. We had no notice. We didn't know this was coming. So it would be helpful to just have that time.
Mrs. Blaney would like to huddle too.
Madame Gaudreau. On our side if you like.
Madame Gaudreau, impose de
Would you like a break for a few moments? Does that work for you?
And if we can come back quickly, because we do have an informal committee members coming, yes?
Madam Chair, can we release the witnesses?
Can we release the witnesses? It was a pleasure to have the site task force here. I know you might want to stay because it's exciting. I see some nodding of the heads in all directions. With that, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your service. We do appreciate all that you do. Have a great day. to discuss the motion that's on the floor. Mr. Turnbull.
Madam Chair, I'd like to propose an amendment to Mr. Cooper's motion here. So I'll read it into the record. So that given the Global News report published by Sam Cooper on February 8, 2023, revealing that national security officials drafted a warning for the Prime Minister in June 2017, alleging that Beijing agents were assisting Canadian candidates running for political offices and included well-documented evidence of Beijing's efforts to infiltrate all levels of government, the committee, A, add additional meetings as required to its study on foreign election interference, and B, invite the following witnesses to testify in public on the contents of the report. Michael Warnick, former clerk of the Privy Council, and Daniel Jean, former National Security and Intelligence Advisor to the Prime Minister. Period.
Okay, so I'm just there's an amendment on the floor. Okay, we just want to focus real quick. Like, let's just do this. So we have an amendment on the floor, which is removing the first name from B and removing all of section C. Just want to make sure we're all on the same page. Mr. Cooper.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and I can say without hesitation that I oppose this significantly watered down amendment, an amendment that would significantly water down the motion. Katie Telford, Chief of Staff to the Prime Minister, is a material witness to the report and the memo. She is the person who reportedly requested that the memo be prepared, and it is also unclear from the report whether that memo was completed, whether it was date stamped, whether it was sent by the to the Prime Minister, whether he was made aware of it. So, in order to get to the bottom of the memo and what the Prime Minister knew and whether he failed to act, it's important that we hear from Katie Telford. And it's similarly important that in order to be able to ask questions of the three material witnesses, that we have a production of documents to inform our questions to those witnesses. So this is just an effort to, let's just say it for what it is, cover up the facts.
With no other people on my list, I'm going to call the question. Madam Clerk, on the amendment.
Ms. Suds. Ms. Suds.
Apologies, couldn't find the unmute. I support the amendment.
Ms. O'Connell. Yes. Ms. Romanado.
Yes.
Ms. Sahota.
Yes.
Mr. Turnbull.
Yes.
Monsieur Berthold.
No.
No.
Mr. Culkins.
No.
Mr. Cooper.
No.
Mr. Nader.
No.
Madame Gaudreau.
No.
Ms. Blaney.
Frustrated that I didn't get a chance to speak, but I will support the amendment.
Yeas pour 6. Nays contre 5.
Sorry, and so I will just say, we'll go on to the main motion as amended. I was looking around just to get a signal for names, and so I will apologize for that. Debate on the main motion as amended. Mr. Nader.
Just in about 10 seconds. I mean, it's disappointing to see the motion effectively gutted, including all the documents be relevant. Just putting that on the record. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Moi, c'était avant le vote, en fait.
It was before the vote. We're trying to reach consensus, and I had good arguments. Thank you.
The question on the main motion on the motion as amended.
Ms. Sudds?
Support?
Ms. O'Connell?
Yes.
Ms. Romanado?
Oui.
Yes.
Ms. Sahota?
Yes.
Mr. Turnbull?
Yes.
Mr. Berthold?
Wait.
Yes.
Mr. Calkins?
Yes.
Mr. Cooper?
Yes.
Mr.
Yes.
Nader?
Yes.
Madame Gaudreau?
Yes.
Blaney?
Yes.
11 yeas pour 11.
So we'll work to, that motion passes. We will, as amended, we will get within it. I understand just from analysts for committee members to know that we anticipate the draft report in both official languages coming to us hopefully late tomorrow. And then hopefully we can then get into Tuesday looking at the draft report next week for Nova Scotia and New Brunswick. Just stay tuned. If it's not here to us by late tomorrow, then we'll revisit next week's schedule. With that, we have an informal committee visit, so I look forward to seeing you all. Have a good weekend. Thank you. Adjourn.